Here we go. Okay. Going live. Okay. Cooperating. Great. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Delegate Brooke Learman, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as a member of the legislature for representing District 46 in Baltimore City, along with my colleagues, delegates Robin Lewis and Luke Clippinger, and Senator Bill Ferguson. Of course, although we represent District 46, we work with our partners, some of whom are on the phone today, to pass and implement policies that affect the entire state. And today, I'm really delighted to be talking about our food systems because I have spent more time thinking about food since March 15th than I have in my life, I'm sorry to say. So I have learned a lot in the past few months, and these folks on the call are really our experts, and I'm really excited to hear and learn more from them as well. I know many of you on the call as well do work in your communities on food systems and providing food as well. So I'm going to make just a few opening comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to our awesome panel today. You know, I think if there's one thing that the pandemic has done besides cause so much unnecessary suffering, it's really crystallized the pre-existing inequities that exist in our society. And whether that's a lack of resiliency in our food systems, in our schools, and communities, wherever it is. And it's made me realize, and it's something that I bring up at multiple webinars actually, how grateful we need to be for those who work in our food system. And, you know, when people think of Maryland, they often think about cities like Baltimore or Annapolis, DC, Rockville, the suburbs, but agriculture is our state's largest commercial industry and contributes over $17 billion in revenue each year. And the industry employs hundreds of thousands of Marylanders. And I think our state's unique landscape is conducive, you know, it's to a wide variety of crops, but also a wide variety of types of farming. And the public health crisis that is COVID-19 has our local growers and florists particularly hard hit, as many restaurants are closed and they struggle with their supply lines and how to get food to people who need it. I have spent a lot of time connecting suppliers with nonprofits and advocacy organizations to make sure that there's a place for that food to go. And I know our municipalities and counties and many of you are doing that work too. I think, you know, this public health crisis has also exacerbated the pre-existing racial health disparities and food access disparities that exist in the state of Maryland. As many as 20% of Baltimoreans live in a food desert, and 36% of all Baltimore neighborhoods contain a food desert. And there are numbers like that for areas around the state. So it's really important for us to have a good discussion on how consumers can help support their local food movement and markets to make sure that there is an opportunity for local produce. And this week is actually Maryland Buy Local Week. So I'm glad we're here having this discussion. So I'm delighted to have our speakers. We'll have Senator Katie Fry Hester. She is serving in her first term in the Maryland State Senate, representing the 9th District, which includes parts of Howard and Carroll counties. And she spent 20 years working in the private sector to foster sustainable development, multi-sector partnerships, stakeholder engagement, and effective strategic planning prior to joining the legislature. Delegate Laura Charkoudian represents District 20 in the Maryland legislature, where she serves on the Economic Matters Committee. And she's worked on dozens of legislative initiatives in Annapolis, including championing important issues like support for small businesses and healthy food for low-income communities, policing and criminal justice reform. Even before she was in the legislature, she was lobbying me on food access at our local farmers market. So it's awesome to have her in the legislature. And of course, my colleague from Baltimore City, Delegate Melissa Wells, who is a community advocate, a labor leader, a financial security specialist. She's a proud resident of Charles Center, right in downtown Baltimore, and a longtime advocate for neighborhoods in the 40th District. Delighted to have all of them here. We also have Colby Ferguson, who's the Government Relations Director for the Maryland Farm Bureau, where he's in charge of representing the Maryland Farm Bureau on issues in both Annapolis and Washington, D.C. He was also, for many years, an agricultural business development specialist in Frederick County. And of course, I'm really delighted to have from Cherry Hill and District 46, Eric Jackson, an organizer, educator, and filmmaker humbly serving as the visionary and co-founder of Black Yield Institute, committed to building a movement toward Black land and food sovereignty in Baltimore. So we are gonna start it off with Delegate Laura Charkoudian, or I think that's what Senator, actually I think Senator Hester, are you gonna start us off talking with, giving us a little bit of context? I can't remember who I said was gonna go first, but it's Delegate Charkoudian. So sure. Delegate Charkoudian, we're gonna have you start us off to give us some context and then turn it over to Senator Hester. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Brooke, for putting this together, for all of your excellent work. And I appreciate the advocate you were before, but I decided it was easier just to get into legislature and put in my own legislation rather than have to, beg in your office. So not that I had to beg that much. It's great to be here. Thank you to my fellow panelists and for everybody who is on this call and interested in this issue. And I see a lot of familiar names, and I know many of you have been working on this issue for a very long time. I'm still going to create some context that may be familiar to some and maybe new ways of thinking about it to others. But it's really helpful, I think, to understand, in fact, a lot of the equity issues that we're looking at right now. A lot of the issues around COVID, a lot of the issues around policing, a lot of the systemic racism issues, a lot of the issues that are coming to the forefront now. I think it's really important to understand that we got here because of policy. And so it's got to be, policy changes have got to be a key piece of how we get out of here. And so I think that some folks just assume this is how things happen. And when we just assume this is how things happen, then we don't take as much responsibility as policymakers as we might to create the structures and the policies that make the equitable and accessible food systems that we need to build. So that's kind of the bigger picture piece. I want to zoom down a little bit now to understanding a lot of where we are right now has come about because of federal farm policy primarily. And there's a number of good resources that highlight how we got to this point. So some of it's been state policymaking, but a lot of it is the federal policies around farming and specifically around how farm subsidies were directed. And it's led to a great deal of consolidation, corporate consolidation within the food system. And that corporate consolidation and really massive farms that has been to the detriment of smaller, medium-sized farms, family farms. And we can see the damage that's caused by that across the country to communities, but also to our entire food system. And so what's interesting about food systems, I think a lot about food, partly because I love eating it and cooking it and preparing it for other people. This pandemic is killing me because I can't feed people, but also because I think that it's a fascinating place to really focus on. When we understand the systems and we work on the systems, we can address a number of really important areas. And so our food system right now is devastating to the environment. We truck our food all over the country, back and forth, sometimes from a large farm to a processing facility back across the country. And so the carbon impact and the damage to just from the trucking alone, never mind the type of farming that might be done, just the trucking alone, is enormous. Then we have the impact on economic development and local economic development, in particular community-based economic opportunities. And we see that the massive consolidated system that we're in really strips away opportunities for local communities, for smaller farmers, urban or rural. We have issues of land preservation. Some of the way that we preserve agricultural land, the best agricultural land preservation policies is having agriculture be a sustainable business model. And so as long as we are not supporting strong local agriculture, we're going to be battling to keep land in agriculture. We're going to constantly be subsidizing that. So from a land preservation perspective, and then from a health perspective, the system that we've built is a disaster, and we pay for it very much we pay for cheap food in the health costs of all of the food-based illnesses. And of course, those play out in a very inequitable way, and we have food deserts in mostly urban communities, but we also have food deserts in rural communities. Tends to impact communities of color more so than white communities. But we see that those health impacts, and again, coming back to COVID, we can see that that health disparity in the pre-existing conditions a lot of times has to do with and is tied to access to healthy food. And so there's equity sort of throughout all of these areas. And finally, emergency preparedness. And I've been giving this little spiel that I'm giving right now for like 10 years. And we've been saying emergency preparedness over and over again. And it's, you know, devastating to now finally be in a time where we saw so clearly over the last several months what we meant when we said not having a strong local food system is going to be devastating when an emergency comes. And now we've gotten to see that. And I won't go into a lot of details, but if folks want to talk more about that in the questions, we can. So that's sort of the bad news. We've built this really destructive and problematic system. The good news is there's all these people on this Zoom and across the country and across the world, frankly, who are working on rebuilding a food system in a way that is equitable and just. And when we do that, and when we build especially strong local food systems, that's not to say there's not a role for the international supply chain. There absolutely is, but right now the internet, we're totally out of balance, and the sort of international supply chain dominates. And so what we've got to do is get ourselves back into a balance that allows for more local, a stronger local component to that. The last thing that I want to say, just broadly conceptually, and then I think that I'll turn it over to Katie, who will talk about more about our bill, is that I think when we work on this issue within this movement, there certainly is some disagreement among many of us who are working on it, but the disagreement is really sort of minor compared to the areas where we have the potential to come together in consensus. And I think especially now it's really powerful as a place where we can bridge urban-rural divides, where we can bridge political divides, where the issues that we're faced with are require us to be creative and thoughtful in building a system, but really they don't have to be sort of political or ideological. And so I feel both, you know, exhausted sometimes, having worked on this for many years, but I also feel hopeful right now. And I feel hopeful that we can take this moment, as we're all trying to be hopeful, that the inequities and the problems and the disparities that are been sort of laid bare in this current crisis, that we can take this, and food systems being one of many areas where we have this opportunity to build something different. And there's one other thing that I want to say about it, which is we've worked on this in a number of different areas, but one of the areas we've worked on is the institutional food procurement in particular. And I think institutional food procurement is important because it gives us a chance to, especially state institutions, really to move the needle relatively quickly to create guaranteed markets. And those guaranteed markets support farmers, big and small, as well as processors and distributors, to make the necessary investments because they know that they have those markets there. And so because farming is a high risk enterprise, with those guaranteed markets of institutions, you can make investments you might not otherwise be able to make. But also it's an equity issue. In that when we look at who it is that depends on institutions, schools, hospitals, and so on, those tend to be people who are potentially lower income folks who are dependent on these institutions, in the case of school sometimes, for their primary meals. And so when we get the local, healthy, sustainable foods into those systems, it sort of has this dual impact of really supporting that economic and local food system economy, but also it's a really important equity piece in terms of who's getting access to that local, fresh, healthy food. And so I'll stop there because I think that Senator Hester is going to talk more about institutional food procurement and specifically the bill that we worked on together and that we hope to override a veto on soon.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Senator Hester, turning it over to you to pick up from where Delegate Charkoudian left off. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Delegate Lehrman, for hosting us, and thank you, Delegate Charkoudian, for that great tee-up. It's really, and welcome to all the other panelists on the call. It's great to be here with you all. I wanted to both give a quick overview of the policy. It was Senate Bill 985, and I can't quite remember the House bill number, but Laura, maybe you can remind us that later. It was called the Certified Local Farm Enterprise Program. And what this bill really did was to try to address in a holistic way some of those challenges that Delegate Charkoudian just talked about. And in a nutshell, the bill would have required different state institutions like our universities, our hospitals, our correctional facilities to try to purchase 20% of their food from a certified local farm enterprise. So this wasn't a mandate. It was the beginning of a reporting bill, that was modeled after the small and minority business bill that's been around for about 30 years. And so to try to get the procurement officers in all these large state institutions to ask, where does my food come from? And how much of this can I buy locally? And so the bill would have created an office that would be responsible for establishing tangible guidelines for these units of state government to follow and to achieve goals set forward by this program. And basically to incentivize them to begin reporting and procuring food locally whenever they can. And it's important to note that we already have a 5% price premium for locally grown food, so the state can pay up to 5% more. It's just that the major barrier, I think, has been with these large contracts, the ease of procuring at that quantity. So it's much easier for example, the procurement officer at the Garrett Correctional Facility to buy directly from Cisco than it is to spend the time, looking around to try to buy local. Although we did find several procurement officers who were really excited about them. Some had already tried, and they just wanted, this additional guidance and the reporting mechanism to make it easier for them. The second part of the bill would have established a certified local farm enterprise food aggregation grant fund. And this was done with existing money that Marbidco already had, but it addressed the key structural piece that's missing, which is if you're going to collect, food from several small local farms, you need a place to store, process and hold that food for large procurement. And so this created, using existing state funds, just a mechanism whereby perhaps at a community college, there could be a place where farmers could, go and store and process their food for state procurement. And so there was, a small fiscal note with this bill that was published. However, that fiscal note actually referred to existing state funds that we already had, and so we're not quite sure why this bill was vetoed. It seems to me like it addresses all these key points. It's good for the farmers. It's good for our economy. It's good for the health of people eating fresh local food. It reduces the number of carbon, food miles that food travels. And, ultimately, when we're looking at a disaster, I mean, when Delegate Charkoudian said she'd been talking about this for 10 years, like I heard her talking about 2 years ago. And at that point I was thinking, well, what if a bomb went off and we couldn't get food, from outside Maryland? But this actually has affected the entire United States in a way that's really exposed, the vulnerabilities in our healthcare system, in our food system. And so I'm really looking forward to, overriding this veto in January and getting the program set up so we can reap, all the rewards of the state, putting its money where its mouth is and buying local. Then not just this week will be Buy Local Week, but every week should be Buy Local Week.
Agreed.
Thanks, Brooke. Can I just give a shout out to the work we're doing locally as well?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Okay, so just on a very local level in Howard and Carroll counties, which are the two counties that I represent, we're trying to, actually we've been very successful so far. We're applying for a grant this week for a program called Grow It Forward. And it's pretty, simple. It takes the farm to food bank model. And so we're raising money for the food bank to purchase local from our Howard and Carroll County farmers. So farmers are really generous people. And there's already a lot of donations that are going on, but this will help them to grow local at a time when the food banks are seeing a major increase in people going to them, and then also a decrease in donations. So if anybody wants more details about this Maryland the Grow It Forward program, you can either contact my office or our email address is growitforwardmd@gmail.com. And I'll put that in the chat box.
Cool. That's great. Sounds like a great initiative. That makes a lot of sense. Now, Delegate Wells, I'm excited to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about what you're we're working on, and some of the urban aspects of this.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. So it's just a pleasure to be here. I could talk about a whole lot, but I think basically what I would just like to begin with is part of how I began to really focus on this path is because so many residents in the 40th district in Baltimore City, but also especially when you look at the Black Butterfly, the 40th district really overlaps on the west side. That is pretty much encompasses all of my district. And so we have some of the highest rates of low access to healthy food. Some communities ranging up to 90%. And I think one of the biggest challenges here in Baltimore continues to be in closing that food access is the fact that when it comes to developers or it comes to big box stores, we don't have necessarily the right data in terms of income and all the other factors that are really discriminatory, and they further exacerbate disparity. We don't necessarily always cross off those boxes in a way that makes them feel confident about that investment, which is really a travesty. But what I began to think about is, well, what is the best way to get access to food but for you growing it yourself or growing it in your community, especially in communities where there are no stores. And we have many of those. And so I began just kind of conversations with different urban farmers. We have quite a few, we have many in Baltimore, and we actually have a thriving urban farming community here in Baltimore, and we're going to hear from one, Brother Eric, after me. But part of what I really wanted to do was to understand what are their challenges. And so working with those farmers, working with the Marbitco, Maryland Agriculture and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation, Farm Credit, Farm Bureau, understanding that access to capital and the capacity to really grow these enterprises, and also to not just grow those enterprises in terms of the land, and also be able to have the ability to process food and to be able to even move more towards different technology like aquaponic, hydroponic, also to be able to have processing, because we can grow a lot of food, but we have to be able to process it and get it. So we heard from other panelists about some of the local procurement, and we're all kind of talking from the same ladder about these issues in many ways. But part of what I wanted to do was to really look at where is the food being grown, what are the needs of those farmers, and also more specifically, how do we create a pipeline of young farmers who want to come into the industry but don't have the opportunity to learn about farming and also be able to do it actively. And so the pilot program I had was really looking at branching together the community, the farmers that currently exist here in Baltimore, and also educators in schools to be able to teach the young farmers and how they can go on to become successful farmers in the future. I think one of the other factors is that I think I lost my train of thought for a second. So creating the pilot program, the bill is HB 1534. It did not pass out of the Senate because we had to cut things short, but I'm really hopeful that next year we will get it passed, and that we'll get it passed with funding. And then I think the other piece I wanted to just kind of lift up is, I serve on environment and transportation, so I'm learning so much about sustainability. And one of the things is that there are some challenges sometimes with having more examples of dense farming. And so my hope is that Baltimore can lead as the model of what sustainable dense farming can look like. And the other piece too is that the more that we create the capacity for our farmers to thrive, we can have additional supply chains that are local supply chains, but also that are supply chains that really do support the economy. And we know that there's a need for us to create more revenue in Baltimore, create more jobs in Baltimore, and create access to food. And we understand that food is a big part of the social determinants of health, and that when you have individuals who are diabetic, dealing with high blood pressure, hypertension, all of these various these health issues, that they need to have access to food. And so it's really about having this kind of all-encompassing process of keeping people healthy and keeping people fed and also keeping people employed. So I'll stop there. I'm sure there'll be many questions, but that's just a really big overview of the work.
No, that's great. Yeah, no, that was great. That was helpful. Thank you. And now I'm delighted to turn it over to Colby to take us back to a broader Maryland look and what the Farm Bureau is doing. So Colby, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Delegate Lehrman. I'm going to try to share a screen real quick. I think
sure.
Kind of look at the...
Make you the host.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, now you should be able to do it.
There we go. I think these two photos I'm going to share with you kind of outline a little bit of where the issues fall when it comes to what farmers are enduring out there. This first one is just the farm share of the food dollar, both nominal and real, from 1993 through 2016. As you can see, for every dollar spent by the consumer back in 93, it was about 17.5 cents went to the farmer. And as you work your way down to 2016, it's about 14, almost 15 cents. But when you add in the inflation at that same time, you see that same 14.5 cents is actually worth about 12 cents. So 88% of the food dollar that we spend goes to somebody other than the farmer. So that's something to kind of remember on that one. And I'll show you another one real quick that maybe breaks down. This one's actually very interesting to see based on where our food dollar and where can we use our dollar better to get more of it to go directly to the farmer. As you can see here, and quite frankly, this COVID epidemic that we've had has caused more people to purchase at the grocery store, purchase directly from a farmer's market. And as you can see, if you're buying raw foods from farmers markets or from grocery stores, 23.6% of that money is going to the farmer. And as you work your way down to the fast food restaurants, you can see that it's less, even down to less than 4 cents gets back to the farmer. So the more processing you have, the more fast food that we purchase, the less money gets back to the farmer. The more we buy locally and buy directly from the farmer, the higher that percentage goes up. So that's just something to kind of think about when you're talking about buying local. To me, those are the biggest things. And because of these changes over time, this is not something that happened in a year or two. This is something that's been going on for decades now, and since basically the 70s and 80s. And because of decades long of the food dollar going less and less to the farmer, you have less and less farmers farming. And so the number is about 2% of our US population actually grows the food for everyone. So when you've got 359 million people and only three or less than 3 million are growing the food for everyone, it gets pretty difficult to make that work. So what I like about what the programs that Delegate Limmerman's worked on, definitely with Delegate Wells and Charkoudian and Senator Hester, have focused on trying to get the local farmer back in the game. And whether it be in the city of Baltimore, whether it be just in Garrett County or wherever it might be, but allowing the Maryland farmer to be able to participate and gather a higher percentage of that food dollar, whether it be through the procurement process or directly to the consumer. So that is our biggest thing that we're working on, is to try to make sure that the farmer, we're price takers, unfortunately. We take what people will give us. We're working with a perishable product. We can't sit on it and hoard it like you can do oil or something like that and just sit off the shores and wait on somebody to buy it. We have to move it when it's ready to go. And unfortunately, we can't grow everything all the time. And I think people figured that out in March and April when they went to the grocery store and all the shelves were gone. We thought toilet paper was bad, but wait until you have an issue where you can't find all the food as well. So food security is a big deal. And that's one thing that I see working with Baltimore City and Baltimore County, trying to work with those farm bureaus to make sure that the Baltimore City farmers are looped in, and we're leveraging our resources to help them out as well. And ag education, it is a very important piece. And I know Delegate Wells kind of alluded to it, but only 35 schools in the state out of 235 schools have an ag education program. So it is an elective. It is not considered a requirement. And I think after seeing what COVID has done to us and our inability to understand where our food comes from, I think we probably should give more priority to it. So I'll stop there to give some more time for some question and answer. If you need any more information from me, feel free to reach out, and I'll
Great.
pass this back to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. That was great, and great and scary graphs. So thanks for sharing data, really important. And now really delighted to hear from Eric to talk about Black Yield Institute and the really innovative work that he and his partners are doing in Baltimore. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate Learman. I appreciate everybody for sharing and setting up the context. And I'm going to do maybe a sharp pivot. And so partially because, you know, talking specifically about where we're going, but also the framework that we utilize with our work is very much centered on building power, and that includes providing economic opportunities for particularly for Black and Brown communities in Baltimore. I should say for the listening audience that that doesn't mean we don't care about nobody else, but we recognize that even if you're looking at the statistics, for those of you all who are nerds like me, you like numbers. I found through studies that were done by Center for a Livable Future at Johns Hopkins University that the data that they produced showed that 86% of the people in Baltimore that experience food insecurity are Black people or African American people of African descent. And then another about 11% are you know, connected to or members of the Latinx community. And so with that being said, we're very clear that why we do our work is the way that we do it is because it's backed by the data. The data shows that Black and Brown people are and specifically Black people are disproportionately impacted by the system that that, you know, we've talked about. And so Black Yield Institute, our approach is both addressing what we consider food apartheid, which is something that we can get into. Maybe somebody's going to ask a question about that later. But then also to build movement toward Black land and food sovereignty. And so we have 5 different ways that we do that. One of those ways is through research, recognizing that we need to tell our own stories, and the big research institutions aren't the only ones who can tell the story, and quite frankly shouldn't be telling the story of people, especially when we have actually, you know, people with technical skills and or you know, we have the ability to design, you know, research studies. We also engage in political education, and then we're also working on building an action network, or in other contexts, a coalition of entities, including corporations, companies, nonprofit organizations, community groups, and independent or individual members to figure out what we can do on the ground. But that leads me to the other 2 areas that we operate from, and those are that operate within Delegate Learman's district in the Cherry Hill and in South Baltimore in general. We operate a, you know, pretty small urban farm that's 1.25 acres, where we are producing food, and we are also producing ornamental plants as well, just trying to figure out, as Delegate Wells talked about, figuring out how to make urban agriculture a viable industry, and figuring out, you know, we're testing out what we can sell and what's working in the markets that we have access to. And then we're also establishing a cooperatively owned grocery store as well in the area, knowing that an issue when we talk about, you know, retail, food retail, one of the biggest issues that we come across is that you know, recruiting retailers, not only is it a difficult task, it's also extractive, in the sense that when we talk about, you know, extracting resources from community, especially in the case where we haven't exhausted all of the energy we can to, instead of outsource help, if you will, to insource. And I think that even though that's maybe an uphill battle, I think it's a battle worth pursuing. And so we've been doing that. And a bunch of our work has been trying to, if I'm very honest, the impetus is to figure out how to do what we're saying that we can't do, right? And the systems that we talked about that's been set up through legislation, through just histories of oppression, we're trying to show that in the 21st century, there is some work that can be done to figure out how to make it both economically sustainable, plus centered on and builds the leadership capacity, economic capacity, of the communities that are directly impacted and disproportionately impacted by these systems. And I mean, if I guess I have to say this, before, during, and after a moment like this, that COVID-19 has presented all of the inequities that folks weren't able to see before, we've been positioning ourselves to show what we can do so that we can make all the mistakes that we can in Cherry Hill and South Baltimore, but also to be successful at establishing a community-owned and controlled grocery store effort, and figure out how to, even with a small farm that we can't produce at scale, make it profitable. And so we're figuring out how to do that, as well as just figuring out how to procure from and aggregate food from other farmers to feed Baltimore, to feed South Baltimore and Cherry Hill specifically. So I'll just stop there and just say that at the very basic level, what we're doing is figuring out how to establish the frameworks that will give examples of how we can, in this new moment, how we can actually do both racial equity work and build economic enterprises that feed people, but that also provide opportunities for those who own businesses, for cooperatives that own businesses, and for those local and hyper-local farmers and food producers on the ground.
That's great. Thank you, Eric, for explaining that, for all your work, and for really being able to, push the boundaries and imagine what should be and what can be possible, and pushing towards that. So we had a number of questions that were mailed in, and a lot of those questions had to do with how can we fix this? What people recognize, who are writing and recognize the racial health disparities, diet-related disease issues that exist, and the lack of, or the excessive amount of food deserts in neighborhoods where Black and Brown people live. Of course, like Delegate Wells was saying in the Black Butterfly, I represent Cherry Hill, where Eric works, and when I'm door knocking, the number one question is now, when are we getting a grocery store? And it has been a persistent and a persistent failure on our behalf to be able to bring one in because of market forces, and it's just been very difficult. And so it's why it's so exciting to see organizations like Black Field Institute think of new models and new ways to do this. But there were a number of questions about what are the policies that we can be promoting at a local or a state level to be changing the systems that are in place. And some of you talked a little bit about some of those policies, but both legislators and non-legislators, if you have thoughts that you'd like to share with folks on what you're working on or what we should be doing long-term, feel free to share, because a number of people are really interested in hearing that. And it's open up for everyone. Senator Frey-Hester, go ahead.
So I honestly think that starting with our bill is a good place to start. Getting state institutions purchasing 20% locally is a great place to start. However, I think we can go even further than that. Nourish New York was a program that was announced earlier this year by the governor of New York State. And that gives $25 million to support this food movement from farms to food banks in New York. And right now what we have in Maryland is a nonprofit, the Maryland Food Bank, who has a similar program, and they're privately financed with $3 million. And so I think we need to go bigger and bolder. And so to that end, and I'd love feedback on these ideas, but number one, I think the state should designate a senior food security officer to work across the Department of Human Services, the Department of Ag, and the Department of Commerce to outline a 2020 food strategy, which feeds people, creates jobs, and builds long-term food resiliency. This is an issue that needs to be looked across and not siloed into those government agencies. So that's something I'm thinking about. In addition to that, I think that and we're all praying, right, that the state gets money from the federal government for COVID-19 relief. But if there's discretionary money there that's going to go to food security, I think Maryland should also appropriate $25 million of that coming federal coronavirus relief to funding a farm to food bank program here in Maryland. The third thing I think we can do at the policy level is to review our food processing guidelines and regulations and make sure small farmers can participate as easily as large farmers. So those are three big, bold ideas, and I'd love feedback on them.
Yep.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So I would say, I guess I'd offer to at the state level, and this is, I think it was Delegate Charkoudian that mentioned a lot of how farming, like our regulations around funding are really established by the federal level. But what the state can do though is we can, and I know there's, we've had conversations, we do really need to have a budget that really dedicates itself to urban and dense area farming and to be able to support the capacity. And a lot of those resources, a lot of that gap, so to speak, funding is not really accessible to farmers that are really trying to scale up and that actually can show success. And by doing that, we can also help those farmers become more sustainable through those state dollars in a way that allows them to be able to use the private market, like what Marbitco and Farm Credit offer, or what USDA offer as well. I think and locally, at least here in Baltimore, is land. You have to have land in order to grow right now. So vertical, obviously we want to be able to go vertical, but you have to still have land. And unfortunately, we are still working through the process in which when we do have access to vacant lots, everyone, we have a lot of vacant lots in this land in Baltimore. However, who owns that land is not always known. And so we do have some more strides to make in terms of making sure that when we do see vacant land, if we are interested in using it for farming, that we understand how we can work with the city to change the deed and to make that land be able to be owned and not rented by or leased by.
Yep. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to comment on prospective policies or changes they'd like to see?
If I can just share, so I mean, a couple of things were shared, and I actually haven't had anything that I would disagree with. I like all of them, particularly the bold idea of having, shifting, policy so that food producers and farmers, small food producers and small farmers are able to, kind of benefit. But also, I know that, especially, in terms of policy work, that it's hard to do this, but really making a concerted effort to figure out how to, and I know it's not what I should say, but whatever. So racialize this, because I think that there is a way, because otherwise, if whatever policies we enact, and I'll give some other thoughts, I think definitely focusing on small farmers, but particularly in the same way the USDA focuses on so-called minority farmers, returning veteran, farmers, and women and other, I forgot what they call that group, but there's a group, of special, kind of identities that the USDA lift up. I think that there is a need to have all of those, farmers, including returning farmers, right? So people who have returned to farming after going through other, professions or what have you, and propping up small family farms. But also, I think at the local and state levels, I think really, and we're working with a couple of organizations to produce a black paper on how we can, make some shifts around cooperatives in particular. So we need state and strong state and local policy that supports funding and programs for the development of cooperative, whether they are producer cooperatives where, farmers are coming together to make it lucrative to sell to these to state, and city, local agencies, but also just cooperatives of all sort that are I believe can be the bedrock of our state economy and the local, economies. I think that those things are important. And again, I mean, it might be different bills or package, but I think that again, addressing extractive economics is important as well. Because if we enact, laws that will and policy that will make it open for corporations to come into Baltimore, then what we've been alluding to but not really saying is around sovereignty. And we can't, as Colby talked about, farmers can't produce everything all the time. However, the question is, what can we produce, and can we be the only ones that do that, right? And I think that there's a good mix between pragmatism and pushing the envelope, but pragmatism is only as practical as we want to be, and so we just got to redefine what is practical and what is possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yep. Go ahead, Lord. Yep.
Yeah, but did you want to go to another question?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. It's fine. This is a lot of people asked about this, so I think that's what a lot of folks are thinking about.
It's really, it's a great question, and I think that it's important to remember, like, just the interrelatedness of things. I think that we want to talk about food, we want to do food system stuff, we have to, because we have to start somewhere. But like recognizing that the reason food deserts exist is because of redlining and because of disinvestment in communities. And so housing policy and transportation policy, like all of it is always connected. And so even when we're focusing on food policy, understanding that it's tied to the other things, and unless we're sort of moving everything at the same time, we're always going to be sort of playing catch up somewhere. So I think that's a contextual piece. And then I also want to say, because Brother Eric started our policy geeking, I think we need to think about our math also, because there's a real way we say, like, okay, local food is more expensive, we can't afford local food, but the price we're paying for not buying local fresh food, the price we're paying is in environmental destruction, in community destruction, in agricultural land destruction, in our healthcare system. And so we really need to also be doing a better job of understanding the sort of pay now, pay later, and have every conversation about, it's not a charity thing to say now we're going to buy from local farmers. It's a smart investment to say now we're going to buy from local farmers. And so starting to rethink our math. It's not just a nice slogan for Buy Local Week. It's actually a new way of thinking about how we invest state money, how we invest our own money, our tax money, in ways that really build long-term the kinds of communities and the kind of infrastructure and the kind of food system that we want. And so that's a really important piece, because otherwise we'll always be stuck on this place of, like, we can't afford it. Related to that, I want to talk a little bit about our policy that we passed, which is, and there's a question about regenerative agriculture that I'm going to actually get to, and also it ties to this question about Black and brown farmers, minority farmers, women farmers, veterans, and so on. Within the procurement system that we built, and it's actually pretty complicated. Katie did a great job of giving an overview, but there's a lot of details in there. And within it, what we did was we said, okay, everyone who's going for a state food contract. So Aramark wants to come in here and get that contract. Normally Aramark goes and gets their food from, all over the rest of the country. They only deal with Cisco, who can go all over the rest of the country, right? Well, now they've got to find a way to be dealing with Maryland distributors and Maryland farmers. So that's the first thing that it does. But then within that, we have the possibility over time, and the bill actually explicitly says that in the regulations, there needs to be built in additional incentives for historically marginalized groups and historically excluded groups. And so once you start creating incentives to make these purchases, you also have the ability to say, we really want to see, we're going to use this to recognizing all of the various disparities that have kept Black farmers from being able to have this food sovereignty that Brother Eric's talking about, that now we can start to, in the way we're doing the state's own purchasing, start to address and redirect our own funds in that way. So that's one thing. The second thing that we did with the legislation, which is really interesting, and I think it creates some ideas to be thinking about. What we've done in Maryland is we have some of the strongest nutrient management programs in, I think possibly the strongest, certainly on the East Coast. And what that means is we are asking Maryland farmers to internalize the externality. I'm an economist, bear with me. So we're asking them to internalize the cost of the impact of their farming on the Bay. And I think I support all of those policies. I know that people on this call may have different feelings about it. But if we're going to do that, if we're going to say to Maryland farmers, we're asking you to internalize the cost of the impact of farming on the Bay. And then we as a state say, you know what, Maryland food is too expensive. We're going to go buy it from Pennsylvania.
Right, that's a huge
Where they're
problem.
farming in a way that's destroying our Bay. What
Right.
we're saying is we want you to internalize the cost. We're not willing to internalize the cost.
Right.
And so what our bill does is it actually says, it doesn't say Maryland farmers, it says farmers farming according to Maryland nutrient management standards. So that automatically means Maryland farmers, but it means that if a Pennsylvania farmer wants to use Maryland nutrient management standards, they
That's
can
okay.
benefit from it as well.
Right.
And so it starts to set our priorities based on how we want our food system to look, instead of just buying the cheapest in the short term food, which in the long term has extraordinary costs to our planet, to our bodies, to our communities, and to equity.
Right. That makes sense. Thank you for that. So I think we'll do well, it's already 2:55. So I think we'll do sort of some sum up. I want to be really cognizant of everybody's time, and we try to keep these to an hour. I feel like we could talk for a long time about this. But if in your final comments, you'd like to mention a little bit about regenerative agriculture or Baltimore City, for those of you who know Baltimore City, what existing Baltimore City legislation or practices encourage or discourage co-op farming. And then there were a couple questions about the role of CSAs. So, and if the CSA model is something that can be used to support creating new local urban farms as well. So if any of you want to talk a little bit about any of those topics in a closing minute or two, please go for it. And why don't we start, why don't we go backwards if that's okay? So start with Brother Eric for some closing thoughts. Thanks.
Sure. And thanks again. I appreciate the opportunity, and would invite a part two. I'm not trying to start no trouble, but I am.
Yep. No, agreed. Yeah, agreed.
But so what I would say is, in general, I think that, just to reiterate something I said, I think that the way forward in the state of Maryland, in Baltimore City, and all of the districts that are represented even outside of Baltimore City, is just pushing the envelope. And I think that whether we're talking about CSAs or we're talking about aquaculture, Delegate Wells, I definitely want to talk with you about that. But I think what we have to do is consider, how we. I think what's important is the insourcing. I talked about that, right? How do we actually bolster current efforts or prospective efforts, like the Cherry Hill Food Co-op that we're working on, or even, current things that we can bolster the efforts of folks to actually build the types of hyper-local food economies that have actually helped to build America, right? And I want to be clear about that is the way that we're going to have to do it. We got to do the math, right? We have to do the math. We have to figure out how to get there. But I think there's much work for us to do. But I think more and more we should be considering, how do we actually bolster what we already have, rather than going outside of state lines and outside of other boundaries to ask for help for other people, and stop subsidizing food. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. Subsidizing food has made it difficult for farmers to farm and then have the price. And it's like, no, I can get that from Walmart for $1. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I think that there's some work that needs to happen. Of course, I know that there's some federal work that needs to happen. But I think that's definitely something we should focus on.
Thank you for that. Colby, any final parting thoughts you want to leave with folks?
I just real quickly, just remember that what we really need to do is get more access to farmers and potential farmers to be able to sell what they can grow in this state, and really be careful with trying to pigeonhole a certain type or certain way of growing, because in some cases it just with the, whether it be pest pressure or whether it be whatever the environmental pressures that are around that piece of ground that's trying to be grown on, in some cases it's just almost impossible to grow specific things, whether it be fruit or vegetables, whether it be whether it be try to grow livestock, maybe the quality of the soil is not the greatest to be able to do a high intensity crop. So that's my biggest thing is I really would like to see us work on more farmer access to the consumer, whether it be through the co-op type thought process where we can bring more small farmers together, because, you know, as it always says, you know, I can grow a little bit really well, but I can't grow a lot really well. So
Right.
because of my size. So I would say that's the biggest thing I would like to see us work on is that farmer access.
Makes sense. Thanks. Delegate Wells?
Sure. So I ditto what Kobe and what Brother Eric said, but I think definitely focusing on, we already have amazing models that are working. So I think that we need to double down on those models with funding and to help those grow in their capacity. I think that also, and I'm still learning, but I think that we really need to figure out a way to truly incentivize the food that's staying local over in a way, I don't want to say over cash crops, but we do need to figure out a way that we can really support food staying local. And I think that really gets to what Kobe was saying in terms of how that benefits farmers financially, and also helps meet the health needs of local residents. So I'll just end there. There's so much more I could say, but I think that those are the two that I would stop at.
Great. Thanks. And Senator?
You did. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been an amazing conversation. Thanks, Brooke, for hosting it, and I'm happy to participate on more. I agree with everything that's been said, and on the last point about the the access to markets. I mean, I just think the state's got to lead by example. We can, by spending our own money locally, we can reinvest, and there'll be a huge multiplier effect in the economy. Which is something that we really have to think about in a resource-constrained environment. And other than that, I think now is the time to be bold. Let's look at food security for the entire state in a holistic manner, and let's invest so that we have future generations of farmers, people back at work and healthy people eating. It's truly a win-win-win.
Yep. And Delegate Charkoudian?
Thanks. Well, I've gone with a lot of big picture stuff. I think I'm going to close with some small picture stuff, or smaller picture stuff. I want to talk a little bit about the infrastructures and the comment about we've been looking a lot at the physical infrastructure, which we're still looking at. How do we find both longer term funding to invest into the aggregation and distribution and processing, right? So the more we can do value added, the more valuable the food is, but also the more we can eat locally grown food throughout the year. So there's the physical infrastructure. And I think right now, as we hope to see federal recovery money coming to hopefully the whole country very soon, and looking at how can we invest that in building a new kind of economy, one of the infrastructure things we can invest in is the aggregation, distribution, and processing of locally grown food. But then the second is the sort of interpersonal infrastructure, the business infrastructure. And so this is where I think the co-ops are really important. I've looked a good bit into our consumer co-op model, and this laws in the state are decent. I mean, not to say they can't be improved, but they're decent. Our producer and worker co-op models are not as strong in terms of their ability to kind of harness the potential that we have. And so I think that's another really important sort of parallel to go with this. I heard somebody say recently, and I wish I could remember who it was because I want to give them credit for it, that the sort of consolidated, problematic, big picture food system that we operate in sort of tries to benefit from economies of scale. And there's a lot of problems that go with that, but the local food system can benefit from economies of cooperation and collaboration. And so I think those are the structures, both physical and business and interpersonal, that we need to build really to kind of harness what's possible.
Yep. Thank you for that. Well, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us today. This was really interesting. I think you're right. We need a part 2 maybe this fall, talk a little bit about what's to come in session and hear next steps. I think, there's a lot of great work happening, but certainly so much more to be done. And I really do, I think that the pandemic has caused many people who weren't paying attention to our food system to think very deeply about where their food is coming from, how it's getting to them. early in the pandemic, when I was hosting these, we always end on a note of gratitude for our farm workers, for the people who are out there doing the work, for the drivers who are bringing it, for the grocery store clerks. There are so many steps and pieces along the way. One of the really interesting things that we've seen happen here in Baltimore is the World Central Kitchen Initiative, where they have been paying several restaurants $10 per meal made, and the restaurants then distribute that food, but that $10 per meal allows for a fair price to the farmer or the supplier who's giving them the food or who's selling them the food, for the worker, and to have high quality food go out to people. So it's really, World Central Kitchen and Jose Andre are really trying to rethink the food model as well. And it's great to have people here on the call who also are. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we're definitely, I hope, moving in the right direction with all of you. So thank you so much for joining today. Great to see you all. Everybody keep in touch, and we look forward to talking more closer to session. Thanks everybody. Be well. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.